Tell me about the senior thesis at Roosevelt.
As director of the finance honors track at Roosevelt University, we try to give students an applied quantitative research thesis. So it's not just more of a qualitative or interview style research process. We really want them to get the data, get their hands dirty with it, load it into a statistical program like the R programming language we like to use, and ask a research question that can be answered with data. And we've got a number of things around that, particularly pairing them with research mentors. I myself am a research mentor, but we also partner with industry folks. And in this particular year, a gentleman by the name of Bryan Peterson, who is an entrepreneur and has done quantitative trading for many decades and has written a lot of software. He wanted to work with both Bryan and Luis on their project, and they suggested a number of topics, and one of them was the topic they ultimately arrived on. So that's a little bit of a background of how we approach this.
Where did they come up with the topic?
Bryan Peterson, who's one of our mentors that assists students in research, he'd already done some work on space travel and low orbit environments and things like this. And he brought it up as kind of an interesting thing. And through those conversations, I think Luis was like, yeah, that sounds very cool. Luis independently was looking into the water futures being traded on the CME group. And so I think once he heard that topic, he was like, hey, maybe I can do something combining the recent advances in space travel and low Earth orbit with trading. And I think maybe Luis could speak more to that.
It started with I had read an article about it, and Michael Berry, The Big Short. So during the 2008 crisis, he was heavily, I guess, looking into water in the future, and he said that's pretty much the next gold line. So I thought, well, if I could do the research now and understand why and his thoughts on it, it would be a good research project to do for my senior thesis. And then me and Justin were talking about it, trying to just narrow in on a topic for the research paper because it was still a little too broad. And then Bryan was there, and they were speaking about their own space commodities project and how water was kind of integrated into it as like fuel propellant. And it kind of all worked out to where I had a little research already done on the water part, and then I just had to kind of learn the space commodities part.
Bryan, how did you and Luis come together?
In the conversation of starting with Bryan Peterson of starting a space commodities exchange, we decided to collaborate together on this project because we speculated that through the initiative of like space exploration and everything, that water was going to be one of the primary resources that was going to be used in this endeavor, right? Or for fuel and for life support and things like that. And it also made sense that it would be one of the first resources to include if we were to start an exchange that would trade commodity resources, right? Space commodities, that water would be one of the first viable resources that would be used to to try and get out into low Earth orbit and for people to find various ways to use it, right? And so we just started working on this project. Started with data collection process, which was extensive. And little by little we built our own database of launch costs. We had to scrape, several websites and papers. It was all kind of fragmented throughout the internet. So those are some of the early steps in this. Yeah.
Bryan, who wanted to be an astronaut more, you or Luis?
I think we agreed that, I think we had this conversation at some point whether, what if this gets us into outer space? Would you actually go? And we're both pretty risk averse in those regards. We agreed on that we'd rather do our research here from Earth for the moment, at least.
Did you interact with NASA at all for any data on this project?
No, not directly. We certainly used a lot of the resources, right? NASA.gov publishes a lot of useful data on their website. We do aspire to eventually to get them involved in the project, as there's has to be some not only government but also other entities that we would like to, take a look at this idea and hopefully end up, participating and trying to drive it forward.
What other commodities did you take a look at?
Ideally, because of the recent large reduction in launch costs, we wanted to, complement that initiative by introducing the idea that fuel, right? Some type of fuel would be one of the other commodities that would be used, right? Air too. A lot of a lot of resources used in life support for astronauts and other missions out there. But eventually, as this matures, anything from raw materials used in production of spacecraft to any other sort of materials, I guess, used that are mined on Earth that can be, that there would be some utility in carrying and having in low Earth orbit, for example, ready to use and be consumed by other participants.
Why are air and water so important for space travel? Are really two building blocks of the entire ecosystem. Not only do humans need them, but they can be used for fuel, right? And they can be used to push objects around, air in particular. But those are two things that there should be a trading hub of some kind for folks to create a market around and be able to procure those materials in space. And so it kind of made sense that those were the two to first really start with. And as far as your question about the data goes, Bryan and Luis both reviewed a number of papers that had chronicled the costs of all of the different launch costs across many different industries. Maybe you guys would like to comment about that. There's the NASA, all of the NASA launches back to 1960. You found out how much those cost. As well as some of the private things. Maybe you two would like to talk about that for a bit.
A main source for to get launch costs was the 2018 Space Compendium, which is released by the FAA, and in there they had the cost of launch systems going back to the 60s, not only for the US but also Russia and China, which are some of the other major participants, and other companies like ULA, SpaceX, a number of other private entities that developed a lot of smaller launch systems. So one of the big classifications in our data was between small, medium, and heavy launch systems. And there was, through several papers and also like the 2018 compendium, we, compiled this database of all of these vehicles. I think it was it was hundreds of different launches, but it was about maybe 130 or so different launch vehicles. So it's pretty extensive over the course of 40, 60 years or so.
What are some ways Elon Musk is advancing getting goods into space?
He's proposed the idea of a rideshare program where, people can, put in a bid, or if they want to launch something, some sort of product, right? You would enter this like pool, right? And when enough participants are available, then that would make up a viable payload to send into into low Earth orbit, or the moon, or wherever it's going. So he's definitely, there's those ideas are definitely being explored.
Yeah, and Luis here, but also space tourism. I know there's companies like looking to make dining experiences in space as well. So overall, just the demand to get out there is just, and I guess with great reason, because the launch costs are reducing so low. So it's just, there's a lot of, I guess, space tourism. There's stuff like mining companies, debris and tow companies as well. Just the overall demand to get out there is really skyrocketing because of this reduction in launch cost.
What did your space market look like, and what currency did it use?
But about the launch costs, I think why they focused on that was, as we all know, transportation costs and commodities is a very important part of pricing them, right? Whether it's you're trading grain, you know that you've got to look at those CIF rates, and you've got to look at your rail rates, and what's a barge cost, and what's the Panamax vessel cost, or all of this. And our whole global world economy, people don't realize this a lot, but commodity traders know it, that the transportation cost is everything. And so I think that was one of the reasons why transportation costs, what it really costs to get something into space, is at this point a key function of the model that Bryan and Luis developed.
So I think Brian Peterson kind of proposed like maybe blockchain, or maybe, something where I guess the denomination, we don't know yet. But the biggest thing after, I guess, that we would need to develop is a space delivery terminal before we even get into, I guess, what denomination we're going to trade in.
Yeah, what currency is an interesting one, right? I guess essentially what the participants at first are going to be, I guess what we call like natural buyers and natural sellers, right? And so these are people who are actually in the industry, right? People who are part of the production of some of these raw materials, who are going to be like the sellers, and eventually those who mine them, either at the asteroid or moon or whatever objects are near near Earth's orbit. And so where that's going to be traded, though, will be traded here in space or on Earth. And we would propose using already existing exchanges, right? Like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or International Commodities Exchange. And for various reasons, one of them being because it would offer a regulatory infrastructure already, right?
The delivery point could be in space, right?
Yeah.
But you could have it traded, the futures traded in your traditional markets that we have. And then that's where the currency denomination would probably come into play. Who knows what that would be? Maybe they settle in Dogecoin. Who knows? But, if it was plugged into existing infrastructure, I think that was one of the ideas that was developed there.
What is the most expensive part of the equation? Storage cost, carrying cost, insurance?
It's going to be fuel. It's going to be the cost of exiting our atmosphere and getting into whichever orbit. And so, fuel cost is as of now, it's or launch cost, I guess, since there's various factors that go into that, is the most expensive part. And it's going to be the biggest factor or variable that's going to influence the price of whatever it is you're trying to send out there, whether it's water or, a water bottle or or clothes or whatever it is, right? In a launch system, as payload is measured in kilograms. So as long as there's no special like storage specifications, right? Because, depending on what you're taking out there, you might have to make modifications to the aircraft, right? And that can incur additional costs. But just assuming that away and just saying it's simple things, right?
We don't know what the storage costs or anything, because we need to develop that delivery terminal before I guess we can come up with that's eventually what we want to build up to. So in our pricing model, we want to take into account all costs. So launch costs, right now we can kind of develop, but in the future when the delivery terminal is up there, We can then factor in things like storage costs and just all those things, depreciation and all that. But for now, launch cost by far is the biggest thing, and it's going down every year or with every launch. So that's kind of what our model proposes, and so that's kind of what we're basing it off of. And as that delivery terminal comes, then we can build off that as well.
Do you see some sort of delivery terminal, space center you have to build to store these materials in?
Yeah, I mean, Brian, again, our mentor, well, the biggest mentor we had with Brian Peterson, he said that delivery terminal would be, I guess, the biggest. We do need something in to kind of midpoint between, or in orbit between Earth and other resources such as asteroids or the moon, where the majority of those resources are. So we can kind of, I guess, have it in orbit while, there's people are mining, and we can get stuff up and down.
Kind of a bold statement, but it's forever been a requirement for commodity markets to have some sort of delivery point, right? For participants to receive the commodity and for it to be stored until contract expiration or whatever have you, right? But all the technology to build a delivery terminal is already there, and arguably we can use, or like even a decommissioned space station, especially if the initial commodities that we'll start with will be water and air, right? They're not very volatile like other types of fuels, right? Or other types of resources, which might have different storage requirements. And so, if we start small with just building a simple delivery terminal and have it just store, compartments in it that are able to store water and air efficiently, that would be a huge breakthrough. And we believe that both it's not that it's economically viable, so it's not, it won't be too expensive to build, and that all the technology in order to do that is already exists.
Right now, every launch that takes place has to basically bring its own air and water for the duration of the trip. And then when they're done with that trip, well, maybe they have excess, or maybe they have, and what could they do with that? Well, they could drop it off at the delivery point, or they could buy it potentially if it's up there and just focus on shipping other equipment, because every kilogram in those small shuttle bays is vital. It's very important. And so, this is why it could be a natural starting point to the trading of all of this. And then you create a market.
What can you outsource into low Earth orbit, right? If it's additional fuel or water that you don't have to carry out, because getting out of our atmosphere is the toughest thing. It's the most expensive thing. And so I believe right now there's a 2017 paper published about this. The reusable launch systems that SpaceX has right now on Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy, about 30 or 40% of the fuel that it carries is for reentry to, come back and land the booster back on Earth and be able to reuse it, right? And so that's additional payload, I guess, space that can be used to carry other types of resources, whether it's water or air or raw fuel. Being able to acquire these resources once you're out there would be already on its own a huge cost saver.
Who are the natural buyers and sellers?
Well, there's a couple companies right now, like Orbit Fab, that's a refueling station. They're, I guess, creating refueling stations to send out in geosynchronous orbit. So they're going to need, I guess, to refuel those refueling stations. So they're kind of like, I guess, intergalactic gas stations, as you could say. So, I think that would be one of the natural buyers. And then the people mining those resources on the moon and Earth, I think, what do I have here? I think iSpace. Yeah, iSpace is a lunar exploration company, and they're looking to specifically moon waters, the moon, or to mine the moon's water resources on the moon, basically. So that, again, water being kind of that first commodity that will be traded in space, I think those would be, I guess, a natural buyer and seller. And then I guess other companies as well will kind of grow into that.
A lot of this initiative, right, at least for the first first stages of this, a lot of those resources will be coming from Earth, right? And so, right, a lot of the materials to build, if we have to build a delivery terminal from scratch, initially that will be sourced likely from Earth. And so a lot of these industries that are already engaged in like primary production, right, just production of raw materials will, I guess, will just have a higher demand, right? As Luis pointed out, a lot of the natural buyers will just be people, companies like ULA or SpaceX are already involved in moving this the space exploration initiative forward. One of our also a mentor in this, David Hurst. He's the founder of Orbital Transport, just a space logistics and infrastructure company. And so, he's been involved in several projects. And for example, he would be, someone who would be a buyer in this marketplace, for example.
Really anybody that needs air and water. I mean, really anybody, any country, any private company. Right now, if somebody needs air or water and they're already up there and they don't have it, they have to borrow it. They have to ask their neighbor, which can be dicey given international relationships. So really anybody that needs these things could participate in this market.
What is the timeline of a market like this, and do you see an over-the-counter market developing first?
I would say over-the-counter market would have to come first, right? It would have to be the actual participants who would be using, by a futures contract, they'll actually be at expiration, they'll either be buying or selling, and they're actual users of this product, and eventually speculators, investors, and people like that will join. As far as an outlook for the delivery terminal, I mean that's quite an endeavor, but again, we do believe if there's not an already existing infrastructure out there, like a decommissioned space station, right, that would obviously be faster to some degree to just repurpose that. But we don't believe that they would take that long, especially if government bodies got behind the project and really pushed it forward.
Well, one thing you might be able to lean on, Brian, is what your research indicated about the cost of launch, right? Do you have any projections there about when launch costs might be cheap enough to make some of these things more viable?
Right, because ultimately a lot of this will be using resources from Earth to build this out there at first. And so we ran a simple regression across the whole time series of launch costs that we had. It gave us just simple coefficient of around $250 like per year. That's $250 per launch costs are being reduced, right? Like per kilogram. That's a per kilogram figure. And obviously they're pretty low now. So the Falcon Heavy, the Falcon 9, I believe, to launch something using that system, it's around $9,000 per kilogram. The Falcon Heavy reduced that by like 8 times, so it's around $1,200 per kilogram. With SpaceX's new Starship, which is able to carry, I think, 100 metric tons, right, up to 100 passengers. Also, it's projected, the vision that it will lower the cost of launch to around 10 to 20 kilograms, or dollars per kilograms, right? That will incentivize a lot of these projects to be pushed forward, because now getting resources, getting some actual like capital and labor force out there, for example, it becomes way more economically viable. And just for reference, right now, I believe international travel on an airplane, it's priced at around $8 to $10 per kilogram, right? And so one of Elon's visions is to get the cost of launch down to what commercial air travel costs. And we see what that did over the last 50 years, so that has done to the global economy, and so we expect some sort of scaling factor of a similar magnitude to affect the space industry as well.
John asked what the timeline is, and it kind of hinges on those launch costs, which is why they focused on it on the paper. But it's pretty amazing to see that not too long ago you're looking at $9,000 a kilogram, and now you're targeting 10 to 20. So that means a kilogram of water not too long ago was $9,000. But if you get it down to 10 to 20, now suddenly this is quite a dramatic order of magnitude change in the pricing, and now it starts to become a little more feasible. So,
and there's other things too, like whether the role that government might play in subsidizing some of this, like research and development of the delivery terminal, for example, can might help accelerate things. Their governments typically with big projects like this, they end up taking the bigger risk, right? And so private entities are a little bit more risk averse, and so that might, if all of the responsibilities put on them to try and take this off the ground, then it might take a little bit longer because of the inherent risk.
What are the career opportunities available in a space market?
The traditional trading, it would be very helpful. Like you will need specs to make these markets. And speculators will play a role in providing liquidity. You could lease out a rocket ship and get your own water up there. You own it. You could deliver against this, right? You could decide when it's time to, take those supplies out of delivery. You could acquire it up there. You could arbitrage between potentially others. So, your question starts to fall also then more into the area of aerospace engineering, and there's gonna need to be a lot of things related. The other mentor that Brian and Luis worked or cued much of their work off of, and the conference that you all presented at. Brian, you mentioned his name before.
Yeah, David Hurst.
David Hurst, yeah. So his work, and they're really focused on like how would you build this terminal and sort of the physical things. I mean, in the end, it'd probably be in aerospace engineering and things like that. But again, there will be traditional finance stuff that has to happen. And I think the commodity markets have a really nice roadmap on how to do that and how to develop it, particularly in Chicago. And so why reinvent that wheel, right?
What is your favorite space movie?
I can go first. It'd probably be, I'd have to say Interstellar, maybe Wall-E. But yeah, I'm one of those great movies. Yeah.
The one with Matt Damon was good, but Interstellar was just it reminded me. It was puzzling, right? It had me thinking. It was kind of like it reminded me of when I watched like Inception, for example. It was just had to watch it like twice, but it was a fascinating movie. I've also have I guess that wasn't the question, but more so I have like a favorite space video game. Yeah. So Mass Effect was a role-playing game that came out for Xbox, like, I don't know, when I was in high school. And it was a lot of the stuff we talked about here is are things you do in the game. Like you have to, you're involved in this community, and you have to go and gather resources, and just the way there's like geopolitics to worry about, and just the way it was structured was super interesting. There's some space pirates involved here.
Yeah. You gotta do a deal with them. You gotta pay them part of it.
Yeah.
Getting shaken down by aliens. This is what's going on. It's not the first time we probably dealt with that problem. I'll say the series on Amazon, which was The Expanse, and The Expanse was pretty interesting, based on a bunch of sci-fi novels by James S.A. Corey. And it kind of talks about this ecosystem, this low Earth orbit ecosystem, and the way that some people envision our journey into space will go. You will have a variety of industries and ecosystems that develop not too far from Earth, and then it branches out from there. So I'm going with expanse.
Is space junk a problem?
Sometimes people are talking about that. We clearly have space junk. We have more space junk than we've ever had before. It is probably going to be an issue at some point.
It is, yeah. Throughout researching some of the stuff, I've come across certain figures out there. I believe, as far as space objects or decommissioned space objects, there's around somewhere in the order between 25 and 30,000 floating in, near Earth orbits. But only around 3,000 to 5,000 are actually being used for anything. All the rest are, just ran out of fuel or, reached end of life. And so amongst some of the space industries that are emerging, space industries to take care of space debris and also space towing are two which are in the picture, and which would be important too to try and mitigate against those issues. Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
As an economist, it's fascinating to me, the idea of developing a space economy, and all of the economic nuances that will eventually that will emerge, right, from this industry moving forward, and I'm curious to see where it will go and hypothesize about it.